Are you still trying to get enough protein? Do you want to lose weight or reduce belly fat? Build muscle? Then you're probably focused on protein. But did you see the headline? It was on Good Morning America, ABC News, Fox News, and USA Today. But if you're a regular listener of Healthy Looks Great on You, you may have already heard that protein is not the key to health. Now, don't get me wrong, protein is essential, but there's so much more to the story. And whether you're new here or you've been listening for a while, you're in the right place to learn what the science actually says and what you can do with that information. Plus, we always have a little fun. Healthy isn't just what you do, it's who you become. I'm Dr. Vicki, and this is Healthy Looks Great on You, a lifestyle medicine podcast to help you reclaim your energy, your focus, and your well-being. Life tested, doctor approved. It's frustrating, really. I go to a restaurant and I order a bowl, maybe with black beans or quinoa or edamame and vegetables and all kinds of healthy protein. And invariably, the waiter or waitress always says, "Would you like to add a protein?" And it's so tempting to explain that meat is not the only protein and it's certainly not the healthiest. But that's not the tip they're looking for. And even if you like to eat beef, chicken, and pork, you're here because you really want to know. So I'm going to ask you to set aside what you believe just for a few minutes and let me challenge you with evidence. Not marketing, but research-based studies. If you live in my neighborhood, you probably try to get enough protein because you've heard that for years now. Especially as you get older, you want to preserve muscle mass or even build muscle. And yet, protein doesn't build muscles by itself. Resistance training does. And yes, of course, you need an adequate amount of protein. But who can answer the question, how much protein do you really need? Well, that depends on who you ask. So let's ask the question. If you're following social media influencers, they'll tell you about protein maxing, getting 1 to 1.5 plus grams of protein per pound of body weight, with protein as the superstar of every single meal. That's a lot of protein, which usually means adding protein shakes and bars to get up to 40, 50, 60 or more grams in one meal. But what if we asked a dietitian? People who have spent 5 or more years getting formal education in science-based nutrition. You'll probably find a lot of variation. But as a general rule, 0.36 grams per pound of body weight is considered the minimum. And if you're an athlete, up to 1 gram per pound. Now, a word of caution. Often recommendations are made in grams per kilogram of body weight instead of grams per pound. So you've got to translate that. And for the dietitians, that translates to 0.8 grams per kilogram as a minimum and 1.4 to 2 grams per kilogram for athletes or very active adults. Just pay attention to the number you know when you jump on the scales, pounds or kilograms. And if we look at extremes, CrossFit instructors, the keto, the carnivore diet, all aim for around a gram of protein per pound of body weight, with carnivore striving to eliminate carbohydrates. And then at the other end of the spectrum is the recommendation from the author of The Blue Zones, Dan Buettner, who researched populations who live long and healthy lives. And he recommends 3 grams of protein for every 10 pounds of body weight during young and middle life, and that translates to about 0.6 or 0.8 grams per pound for people who are moderately active. However, people who are more athletic and are over the age of 65 do need more. Now, these people groups where people live these long, healthy lives eat mostly plants and eat meat about 3 or 4 times a week, with the exception of the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California, who are strict vegetarians. Dan Buettner indicates that there is no single number that works for everyone. And that makes sense. Protein needs depend on a lot of different things like your personal body weight and your activity and your age and your health goals. Now, we all have our bias, and I am biased toward population studies like blue zones. Anecdotally, my grandfather lived to be 91 years old, and he ate bacon and bologna on white bread with mayonnaise, cheese puffs, and Little Debbie snacks. But I don't think that's going to work for me, and it probably won't work for you either. Healthy Looks Great on You podcast is based on recommendations from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And they recommend a baseline protein intake of 0.4 grams per pound, which is 0.8 grams per kilogram, of body weight for healthy adults. Of course, older adults may require more, up to 0.6 grams per pound, and that's 1.3 grams per kilogram, and it's to prevent loss of muscle. But hold that thought. Again, plants are emphasized as the best choice instead of meats, which often have high levels of saturated fat. And it's not controversial that that's bad for your heart. But the USDA recommendations aligned with the dietitians until recently, and they increased the baseline amount to recommend 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound of protein, which is 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram. Now, oddly, this change was not based on new research, and in fact, it is reported that the USDA and HHS actually rejected 30 of 56 recommendations from their very own independent science advisory committee. So, as far as I can tell, it's just a man vibe that motivated the change. But how did we get here? Well, in 1972, a cardiologist published a book, Dr. Atkins' Diet Revolution, the high-calorie way to stay thin forever. Thin forever. Is that what we really want? Because you can be very thin and not be healthy. But the Atkins diet advocates carbohydrate restriction for weight loss. And listen, weight loss is just not the end-all desired result. Besides, by some reports, Dr. Atkins himself had heart disease, and at least at the end of his life, his weight was in the obese range, though his family disputed that that was diet-related. And I certainly don't want to ever criticize someone's health, because I know what that's like. But studies never showed that weight loss on his diet was sustainable. Not surprisingly, they did show an increased risk of heart disease because of all the protein and saturated fat without any fruits or vegetables. I should mention that there is evidence that the keto diet can help with epilepsy and possibly other neurologic diseases. On the flip side, people with kidney disease are advised by specialists to have a low protein intake. Confusing, isn't it? And here's the deal. When we look at data, protein intake in the average American adult exceeds the minimum requirement, which begs the question, why are you trying to get enough protein when likely you already do? Could it be effective marketing? Let's go to Mini Medical School and learn about the study behind the recent news splash. First, the paper that hit the headlines was a review published in the July 2026 edition of Cell Press Blue. I've never heard of that journal, and who knows what the process is for getting something featured. I suspect it has something to do with the way controversy sparks conversation and therefore visibility. But that's another story. The link to the study is in the show notes if you want to read it for yourselves, and I encourage you to do that, but I'll just tell you what it says. The title of the article is The Hallmarks of Protein and Amino Acid Restriction in Aging and Longevity. First line in the introduction reads, since McKay's 1935 report that calorie restriction extends rat lifespan, calorie restriction has proven to be a robust and reproducible intervention with benefits for lifespan and health span in organisms ranging from yeast to non-human primates, as well as significant benefits for human health in short-term studies. That's right, rats, yeast, and short-term human benefits, maybe. Besides, McKay looked at extreme calorie restriction, so yeah, we're not doing that. So moving on. The paper discusses the recent changes in the recommendations from the USDA, stating that they are supported by studies finding that short-term high-protein diets promote weight loss. Aha! Now you may be thinking, you were wrong about this whole protein angle. But wait, there's more. Eating more protein can help control your appetite. Plus, it takes some energy to digest protein, so there's that. Most people can lose weight on a high-protein diet, and some people can even maintain that weight loss by focusing on protein. So this isn't an anti-protein paper. It's an argument against a one-size-fits-all high-protein default. But then the paper goes on to say that accumulating evidence challenges the idea that higher protein intake is beneficial. Human association studies have found that high-protein diets are associated with an increased risk of diabetes, cancer, and mortality, as well as an increased risk of death due to cardiovascular events. So here's what I did, because I have a curious mind and I love to learn, and I want to curate all of this research for you. What those studies reviewed in this paper showed is that with higher total protein, the risk of diabetes increased. And then there's an old paper from 2014, and these results suggest that low protein intake during middle age, followed by moderate to high protein consumption in older adults, may optimize health span and longevity. In 2007, there was a Swedish study that showed a diet characterized by low carbohydrate, high protein intake was associated with increased cardiovascular disease and mortality, especially in women. And this one's really interesting. In a recent study in Britain, they looked at twins and found that there was more muscle loss in the twin who ate a high protein, low carb diet. Here's a neck brace to help with the whiplash that we just got. This is a lot of tedium, so I know it's tempting to just lean on your bias and get back to eating your Greek yogurt. But wait, people in the United States consume more protein, a lot more protein than other countries that have lower rates of chronic disease and obesity. And in fact, people in Okinawa, Japan get only about 8% of their calories from protein. Plant protein, by the way. Whereas the standard American diet adds up to around 15% of daily calories from protein. Americans used to average around 60 grams a day a few years ago, and now they're pushing to get 90 grams a day or more. And some people do need more protein in their diets. Elderly people with overall poor caloric intake, pregnant women, those recovering from serious illness or surgery, or athletes, or people rapidly losing weight due to GLP-1 agonists. And those are the reasons that it's so hard to answer the question, how much protein do I need? Because your needs are individualized, and they even change over your lifespan. But statistically speaking, there's a 95% chance that you already get enough protein. Only 5% of women in the United States are protein deficient, and even less if you're a man. But here's what's missing for most people: fiber. Contrast the fact that 95% of people in the United States get enough protein to the fact that 95% of women in the United States are fiber deficient. We live in a protein-obsessed, fiber-deficient culture driven by effective marketing that has stooped to putting grams of protein on packages of chips, donuts, cookies, and powders. Thin for life should never be your goal. Health for life, on the other hand, is the desired result. And having a healthy gut microbiome fed by fiber and probiotics found in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, beans, and legumes is the goal. Because gut health affects everything: appetite, sleep, mood, and metabolism. And yes, your waistline. If you are eating a plant-forward diet, you do need to be mindful to get enough protein. So add that quinoa, edamame, beans, and spinach, and it'll add up quickly if you incorporate them into your daily diet. I know it's easy to get reeled into the current protein craze, but when you examine years of evidence, you might consider pausing and exercising a little caution, because eating more plants is not controversial or confusing. They're versatile, tasty, good for you, and good for your metabolism. Don't know where to start? Download my free pantry guide of 10 items you can keep in the pantry and 10 items you can keep in the freezer so you're ready to fix a healthy, fiber-rich meal for your family, even if you come home late and don't have a plan. And there are a few recipes included too. Just go to my website, healthylooksgreatonyou.com, and you'll find the No Plan, No Problem Pantry Guide. Or you can go to www.healthylooksgreatonyou.com/pantry guide. It's free and it's really worthwhile. And relax. You should probably spend your energy lifting weights if you want more muscle instead of calculating your protein needs and counting grams. Eat more plants for your health, because healthy looks great on you. All the links for this episode are in the show notes, including the studies and the free pantry guide at healthylooksgreatonyou.com.
The information contained in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not considered to be a substitute for medical advice. You should continue to follow up with your physician or healthcare provider and take medication as prescribed. Though the information in this podcast is evidence-based, new research may develop and recommendations may change.